This is why this very Porsche Boxster that I'm driving is my dream car. So it all started when I was 12. The Porsche Boxster didn't exist when I was 12. I'm old. But when I was 12, I started doing computer programming. I wanted to make video games. That's how a lot of people get into computer programming. Well, over the years, I learned new languages, more in-depth languages. At 12, I made a few little games. And then at 14, I started getting into 3D programming and made some 3D graphic engines, physics engines, all that kind of stuff. And eventually, I created a few games, and I had 4 video games published internationally. They're not, by today's standards, they're not that great, but at the time they were okay. So, made some money from that. Before I had actually gotten them published, I was in college. So I started college a little earlier than some folks. I graduated at 16, so started college immediately after that. And I continued working on video games like the whole time. And eventually, I made a few that were decent. At least decent enough to make an okay amount of money off of. And at the time, I was getting ready to have these published, and I'm in college. So I go to the Porsche dealership. Well, when I started college, it was 1997. So 1997, if you're a fan of the Porsche Boxster or Porsche in general, you just follow that. 1997 was the first model year of the Boxster. So I had been in college a few years, so it would have been about 99. This is a 1999 Porsche Boxster. Went and checked out the Porsches because my dad was a huge German car fan. He had Volkswagens. He always wanted a Porsche, but he never had one. And because he wanted that, I think that carried on to me to where I wanted that. My first car was not a Porsche. My first car was a Mercedes, 73 Mercedes 280C. I had a few other Mercedes after that. But I almost bought a Porsche 914 and a 911 3.2 Carrera before buying the Mercedes because I had enough money and was there. But one I was talked out of by the 914, I was talked out of by the guy selling it. And the 911 I was talked out of by my parents because of insurance, which is probably true when you're 18 years old. Insurance on a 911, even an older one, is probably not going to be cheap. So anyways, I've got this game company that I've started. I've got these games in the work, and I'm getting close to getting them published. So I decide, hey, I'm going to go to the Porsche dealership and check out the Porsches. Now, I had heard that the Boxster was $50,000, and to me, I saw the styling. The front looked just like the 911 at the time. I liked that it was a convertible. I really liked British roadster, classic roadsters. And this was when the roadsters started to kind of make a comeback. I had some friends with Miatas, and I thought they were cool, and they were light and nimble. I wish they had a little more punch is all. And the Boxster, for the time, this Boxster was fairly quick. And I mean, it'll still go 150 miles per hour flat out. It will, well, just under it, 149. And it will go 0 to 60. Porsche claims 6.7, Motor Trend, Road and Track, a bunch of those magazines managed it in 6 seconds. Now, whether or not the transmission was thrashed after that, I don't know. But in theory, it can do 0 to 60 in 6 seconds with no modifications. And because of going to the Porsche dealership, they let me check out the car. They let me have a brochure of the Boxster. And this then became the car that I really wanted. I wanted a Porsche Boxster one day. Now, a lot of stuff happened, and I eventually got my first Porsche. It was a 924, so not exactly the most powerful, just the standard one, US of course. So smog emissions strangled that car. It was already not incredibly powerful, but smog emissions just made it not that good. The car only cost me $200 though, so I didn't pay a lot for it. After that was a project car. It ran, but it had an oil leak. So after working on that, eventually I sold that and moved up to a 944 because I wanted more power and just a little bit more performance. And the 944 I had for 5 years. Great car, dependable. The one mistake I made was deciding, hey, I'm going to turn this into a race car, and stripping out the interior totally, and it really made that car hard to live with on a daily basis. Don't get me wrong, it was fun, but it was loud, and just for daily commutes, it wasn't a pleasant drive anymore. So eventually I sold the 944 and got the Porsche Boxster that I have now. Now, when I bought this, I was looking for a 911, and I had the cash, so it wasn't a matter of cash. I actually paid more than what the average Boxster was going for this one, because I knew something of its history. It had lower mileage. It had 65,000 miles, so it was over 50,000, which is good for IMS, because usually you'll know if your IMS bearing's going to go. You have more semblance of most of them apparently either grenade well after 100,000 miles or before 50,000 miles. So there's kind of like this endpoint. It could happen anyway. It's less likely to happen. So this particular one being a 99, if you know anything about the Boxster and the IMS, this has the double row bearing. So this is a better bearing design, less likely to fail. However, it's still a failure point. And when you do your clutch on this, when I do my clutch, I will be replacing the IMS bearing. And if it grenades on me, I already am prepared. If it grenades on me, that's when I will either upgrade to a 3.4 liter 911 or a 3.2 liter from a Boxster S, depending on the Boxster S engines are less expensive, but there's 50 less horsepower that you could have in that 911 engine. So of course I had other cars that were dream cars of mine. Lamborghini Diablo. I really wanted a Lamborghini Diablo, and I've always thought I wanted a 911 one day. When I was searching for this one, like I said, money wasn't necessarily a factor. I was looking for a 911. The problem I had was where I was living at the time was on the coast, the central coast, and mostly what there are in the area where I was were either college students or retirees. The thing about most retirees is they don't buy, a lot of them have knee issues, hip issues, things of that nature. So a lot of them will shy away from a manual transmission for obvious reasons. It's difficult to shift. So all I could find in my area was a Tiptronic. And I wasn't even thinking about the fact that the Boxster at one time was one of my dream cars. I just drove it and I loved the drive. Now, it wasn't as powerful. I had driven a 911. I had driven a new Boxster, came in, and those were much more powerful cars. But this one had, interestingly enough, the sense of speed to me was more like the 911, because this year was a little less muted and above 5,000 RPMs, which unfortunately I haven't been able to get through because of traffic. You can't always do that. But above 5,000 RPMs, this car is just brilliant. The sound, the wail, especially with the top down, great. Now, for everyday driving, it's just a fun car. It's quick enough to get around most traffic. All but the fastest cars you can get around no problem, and if they're going that fast, you don't need to get around them. And it's just enjoyable, especially on curvy roads. I mean, it's amazing how fast you can take curves. You just got to keep up with the tires, because if you drive on worn tires, you will lose traction on the back end a lot easier. So that's pretty much why the Boxster is a dream car. I've wanted it ever since I was about 18. And then once you drive it, just the way it does things, it's so well balanced. There's a reason why so many people, so many journalists, when the Boxster released in the late 90s, you still had the 993 for the 911 in 97, and then you had later the 996, and a lot of the journalists would comment that they would actually have gone for the Boxster if choosing between the two. And that's saying something. I mean, 40% of its parts are shared from the 911 of the 996 911, because partly it was cost saving to improve. And originally this car, if it had been built the same way that the 993 was built, the Boxster would have cost $80,000. So they had to improve their manufacturing methods to make this in the $40,000 to $50,000, depending on options and stuff. Could be a little bit more, but to get it in that range. So sometimes you do get to own your dream car. It may not be what everyone else thinks of as a dream car. A lot of people would say, well, you didn't get the real dream car, you didn't get the 911, you didn't get that Lamborghini. And you know what? That's fine. It's a fun car. I enjoy driving it. And isn't that all what it's really about? It's about the experience. It's about enjoying what you drive. The car has been relatively low cost to maintain. To maintain a car that is almost 20 years old, I have not put very much money into it. And because I bought a well-maintained example to start out with, it's really not cost a lot. In fact, I'm looking at buying a 911, but not getting rid of this. So in a few years, I'm thinking of buying either a 997 or a 991, depending on how the prices are. I don't like the idea of buying a new one. Now, I like the new ones, don't get me wrong. New cars are great because they're fast, things are less likely to go wrong, there's no wear. But the amount of depreciation that Porsches have is so much that I feel like if you buy a new one, you're just taking a huge hit for not enough performance gain. And the 997 performance and the 991 performance, I've driven them, they're wonderful drives. They're different than this. This is more of a sports car. Those cars are more GT-ish. They've gotten bigger, but they're still incredible drives. So that's how a Porsche Boxster became my dream car. So thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Anyway, that's off track.